This is more of a cautionary story than anything else. I know I made a lot of mistakes that night, and I own that. But if telling it helps someone else avoid ending up in the same kind of situation, then maybe it's worth it. I'm not much of a drinker. Normally I avoid alcohol, but about once a month I'll go out with friends and let loose. This night started off just like any of those rare nights out. My friends and I hit a few bars in the city, drank more than we should have, laughed too loud, and for a while everything felt good. Toward the end of the night they all left, but I decided to stay behind. I was talking to a guy I found attractive, and in my tipsy state I thought going home with him sounded like a good idea. The whole thing was disappointing. Let's just say it wasn't worth the trouble. Afterward, I was ready to leave and get home. I opened my Uber app, but since I had no idea where I actually was, the app kept spinning. Requesting? Finally I canceled and tried again. That's when a car pulled up in front of the building. Without thinking, I stumbled toward it, slurred something like, "This the Uber?" and got in. That was my first mistake. The guy didn't say much at first, just pulled away and got on the road. I was distracted, digging around for a cigarette and trying to make small talk. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I realized we weren't heading in the direction we should have been. Instead, he was flying down the highway at close to 90 miles per hour, and it was the opposite way of where I thought I needed to go. That's when my phone rang. It was my actual Uber driver. He was waiting for me, which meant I had just gotten into the wrong car. Not only that, but I'd gotten into a car with someone who wasn't an Uber driver at all. Panic set in fast. I started texting a friend, trying to list off mile markers as we passed them, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. She'd been drinking too, and even if she was sober enough to understand, she had no way of helping me. So I called 911, doing my best to keep my voice calm and casual. The man must have noticed, because he started snapping at me. "Who you calling? Better not be the cops. Better not be a snitch." He was aggressive but also distracted, weaving through traffic, driving way over the limit, and at one point lighting up a joint like none of this was unusual. I was terrified. I didn't want to say or do anything that would push him over the edge, so I tried to make my conversation with the dispatcher sound like I was just talking to a friend. "Hey girl, it's me," I said, praying the dispatcher understood. "Yeah, I'm riding with someone right now. We're passing exit name. No, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not." Thankfully, the dispatcher picked up on it immediately. He kept me on the line, coaching me through what to say, and came up with a code. If I saw police cars, I'd stick my hand out the window like I was just holding a cigarette. By now, we'd been driving for nearly 40 minutes. I had no idea where we were. My chest was tight, my hands were shaking, and the guy kept throwing me sideways glances, muttering under his breath like he was trying to figure me out. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled off the highway into a small residential area. He parked, pulled out a bag of white powder, and made 2 lines across the dashboard. He didn't even care that I was sitting there watching. That made everything 1,000 times worse, because if he was on drugs, then there was no telling what he might do next. I tried to keep it together and relayed it to the dispatcher in code. "Girl, I wish you were here," I said into the phone, forcing a laugh. "This guy just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taking a big bump." That's when I finally saw flashing red and blue lights in the distance. I didn't care if it gave me away. I stuck my hand out the window and started waving frantically. The guy didn't even have time to process what was happening before we were surrounded. The officers dragged him out of the car first, then pulled me out once it was safe. They rushed me to the hospital for evaluation, and it wasn't until I was sitting in the back of the cruiser on the way there that I learned who I'd been riding with. The man was in his early 40s, and apparently he'd spent nearly 30 of those years in federal prison for violent offenses. I keep thinking about how easily things could have gone the other way. If I hadn't stayed on the phone with 911, if the dispatcher hadn't picked up on my hints, or if the police hadn't gotten there in time, I don't know if I'd even be here telling this. So here's my advice. If you ever feel like something isn't right, call for help and don't hang up. Stay on the line no matter what. That phone call probably saved my life. This happened about 6 months ago, and I only just recently worked up the nerve to use Uber again. I was leaving a work event at a bar around midnight in a city about an hour from the suburban place I share with my partner. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, average build, not particularly strong or intimidating, and while I wasn't drunk that night, I definitely had a light buzz going. 3 drinks isn't a lot, but it was just enough to keep me relaxed and maybe a little too trusting. Normally, if I know I'll be staying late, I book a company car home, but I hadn't done that this time since I wasn't sure when I'd leave. Uber seemed easier, and since the company reimburses me anyway, I didn't give it a second thought. When the car arrived, I said goodbye to my coworkers and climbed into the back. I always try to be polite to drivers, so I introduced myself right away. This guy, let's call him Ed since I never actually got his real name, seemed completely normal, friendly, talkative, nothing unusual. For the first 15 minutes or so, we had a light conversation while driving out of the city. At one point, he mentioned the area he lived in, which happened to be not far from my own neighborhood, though it was nowhere near the route we were taking. At the time, it didn't strike me as odd, just small talk. Eventually, the conversation faded, and I turned to scrolling through my phone. That's when he told me I could nap if I was tired. It didn't sound strange at first, but then he added, "I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" My stomach tightened. I told him I wasn't drunk, just had a few drinks, and besides, I didn't need a nap. I tried to make it sound lighthearted, but something about the way he pressed it set me on edge. Not long after, he told me the highway up ahead was a mess with construction, and that traffic would crawl if we stayed on it. He asked if I was fine with him taking a faster route. Already unsettled, I just wanted to be home, so I said yes. Conveniently, my partner called right then, asking when I'd be back, and I made sure to loudly mention him by name and that he was waiting for me. I wanted the driver to hear it, to know I wasn't just some girl no one expected. We got off the highway at an exit I didn't recognize, but I figured maybe it really was a shortcut. I buried myself in my phone to avoid conversation. Out of nowhere, he said, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." My chest dropped. We were still at least 25 minutes from my place, and this shortcut had actually stretched the drive longer. I forced myself to act casual, rambling about how nice the neighborhood seemed, and even tossing in a lie about me and my boyfriend thinking of moving nearby. He didn't respond, just kept driving. And after a while I realized we were heading back in the direction of my home. Relief started to creep in, but it didn't last. As the drive continued, he began asking about my boyfriend. At first, harmless questions like how long we'd been together, what he did for work. Then, just 10 minutes from my house, he asked if my boyfriend made me happy. I smiled, said yes, very much so, even gushed a little. He nodded slowly, then asked, "Do you make him happy?" The question threw me, but I brushed it off with a joking, "I sure hope so." 8 minutes away. He suddenly turned onto a dark side street, stopped the car, and twisted around in his seat to look at me. "Would you make me happy too?" At first I just stared, not processing what he'd said. He repeated himself, this time more direct. "Do you want to make me happy tonight?" My blood ran cold. The street was empty, no lights in nearby houses, and it was close to 1 in the morning. I had a small knife and pepper spray in my bag, but pulling them out felt impossible. Too risky when I didn't know what he might have. So instead, I fell back on the only shield that has ever consistently worked in situations like this. "I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much." His grin faded. "He doesn't have to know. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you could start." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. "He's waiting for me, and I love him. I don't want to hurt him. Please just take me home." Something in my tone must have struck him, because he didn't say another word. He turned back around, put the car in gear, and drove me the rest of the way without speaking. When we pulled up, I thanked him out of pure habit, quickly got out, and went inside. The moment I hugged my partner, I broke down crying. He insisted I report it right away, so I opened the Uber app. But when I looked at the ride history, my stomach dropped again. The profile photo wasn't the man who had driven me. The car matched, but the listed driver was a middle-aged man with darker skin and a turban. The guy who drove me was white and closer to my own age. Whoever he was not the person Uber had on file. Uber refunded my trip but never followed up. My partner pushed me to go to the police, so I did, but they brushed it off since nothing actually happened. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the fear that he knew where I lived. It's faded with time, but I'll never forget how vulnerable I felt. So please, always double-check your Uber driver's face against their profile photo before you get in. That one small step might save you from a night like mine. This happened about a year ago, but it still stuck with me because of how wrong it could have gone. I was visiting some friends in the city, about an hour away by train from the place I lived with my boyfriend. It was getting late, and the last train home was leaving in less than an hour. My friend's place was only a 10-minute drive to the station, so I told them I'd need to head out soon. The friend who had promised me a ride earlier had gotten too drunk, so he ordered me an Uber instead. Normally I would have just spent the night, but I was in the first trimester of my pregnancy, and all I wanted was to be back in my own bed, safe with my boyfriend. When my friend ordered the first Uber, he saw the driver's photo and canceled, saying the guy looked creepy. We laughed about it, but he did the same thing with the second option, hesitating before finally letting it stand. The driver didn't exactly look inviting either, but less unsettling than the first. A few minutes later, the car pulled up. I got in, and the driver immediately asked if I was Chris, my friend's name. I explained that my friend had ordered the ride for me, and that he had the right passenger. He asked my name, then followed up with, "Is he your boyfriend?" I told him no, just a friend, and gave my first name. He smiled and said something about how a girl like me should have a boyfriend, then complimented me again. I thanked him quickly, tried to put in an earbud, but he kept talking, circling around the same topic. Now, I know that city like the back of my hand. I'd lived there before, and I could navigate to the train station blindfolded. At that time of night, traffic was light, and nearly every main route led to the same place. So when I saw him put the directions into his GPS, I knew exactly where we should be headed. The first instruction popped up: turn left at the next street, because straight ahead was a dead end. Simple. But instead of turning left, he suddenly veered right into a narrow alley. His GPS immediately told him to turn around. I told him it wasn't the right way, and only then did he act like he realized it was a mistake. He laughed it off, saying, "I'll get you there if you don't mind me speeding." Before I could even answer, he slammed the gas, shooting us up to 50 or 60 miles in a residential area where the limit was barely 25. Then, just as suddenly, he stomped on the brakes at a stop sign, the seatbelt cutting into my shoulder. He kept doing this, speeding and braking hard, while following the GPS for a few blocks. Then he ignored it altogether and started heading in the opposite direction. That's when I knew. He wasn't planning to get me to the train. I texted my friends, telling them something was wrong, and they told me to come back. But I was stubborn and desperate to sleep in my own bed, so I tried again to reason with him. "This isn't the way. I'm going to be late for my train." He shot back, "You won't be late," even though he had no idea when my train was. A Camaro pulled up behind us, close enough to make him nervous, and he started muttering that cops were following him. At first I ignored it, but he kept asking me louder each time, "Why are the cops following me? Why are they following me?" I stayed quiet, and finally, when the car behind us turned off, he calmed down. But by then I noticed it had been 15 minutes, and we weren't even a mile from my friend's house. I wasn't going to make the train no matter what. I demanded he take me back. He kept insisting I'd make it, but I pushed harder, pointing at the time on my phone. Finally, he gave in, but not before slowing down at an intersection near a bus stop where a young woman was standing alone. For a moment, my stomach turned as I realized he might have been trying to pick her up. My phone had been buzzing nonstop with texts, and maybe he realized people were watching out for me, because after that, he drove me back without protest. When we pulled up, my friends were already waiting at the door. I got out quickly and walked straight inside, only to glance back and see him stop down the street, talking to someone in a hoodie on the sidewalk. I don't know what his intentions were that night, but I can guess. I reported everything to Uber and even to a local drivers forum, hoping someone else wouldn't end up in the same situation. This happened a couple of months ago, and it's honestly still rattling around in my head whenever I have to call an Uber. I was heading out for a first date that night, excited but a little nervous the way you are when you're meeting someone new. Because it was a date, I'd put a bit more effort into my outfit. A fitted top that dipped slightly at the neckline with black pants. Nothing over the top, but enough that I felt put together. I ordered my Uber like I always do, and when the car showed up, I went to open the back door as usual. That's when things started feeling wrong. The driver leaned across the seat and blocked me with his hand, insisting that I sit up front instead. I tried to politely decline, telling him I preferred the back, but he literally wouldn't let me in, hands still out, smiling in this way that made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I got in the front, wedging myself as far to the right as possible. When I sat down, I realized out of the corner of my eye that he'd had his hand on the seat, like he was waiting for me to sit on it, and only pulled it back when I avoided it. My nerves shot up instantly, and I pulled out my phone, texting my cousin to tell her exactly what was happening and to keep talking to me. While I'm texting, he starts asking questions. Where I'm going, who I'm meeting. I told him I was heading to a date, hoping he'd leave me alone if he thought someone was expecting me. Instead, he looked me over slowly and said, "Really? You're not married? When I saw you, I thought you were going out and your husband and kids were staying home." It was such a weirdly specific comment it made my skin crawl. I gave a short, no, not married, no kids, and tried to put in my other earbud. That only opened the door for him to start lecturing me about how I should have children and how kids should be my first priority. I kept trying to change the subject or go quiet, but he wouldn't stop. Finally, I blurted out that I couldn't have children, thinking that would shut him up. It didn't. Instead, he started asking invasive questions about my health, and I snapped, telling him that trying to carry a baby would likely kill me. He barely reacted, just said I needed to pray harder for God to heal me so I could have his children, and added he'd love to give me all the kids I wanted. Every so often he'd reach his arm over like he was going to touch me, and each time I recoiled, telling him to stop. He'd apologize in this half-hearted way, then go right back to telling me how beautiful I was, and how in his country, Kenya or maybe Nigeria, I'm not sure, everyone would be in love with me. At this point, my brain was running through every bad scenario, from kidnapping to worse. I told him very clearly that I was texting my cousin, and then made a phone call to the restaurant to put myself on the wait list, in reality giving them my name, description, and ETA in case something happened. That seemed to quiet him for a few minutes. As we got close to the restaurant, he started again, asking when he could see me next. "I don't know when I'll see you again, and it makes me sad," he said. I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Well, I guess if I ever end up using Uber again and you somehow end up as the driver." Inside, I was thinking, just get me to the restaurant. Don't make him angry. He kept pressing, saying he needed me to do something to make him feel better. Finally, we were within a block of the restaurant. He slowed down to stop, and I immediately unlocked the door, jumped out, and told him to leave me alone. He looked furious and reached out, but I was already on the sidewalk, putting distance between us. I contacted Uber right after and reported everything. They told me they couldn't share the details because of privacy rules, but reassured me the driver had been removed from the platform within the hour. I've been nervous about using Uber ever since, though thankfully nothing like that has happened again. Later that night, when I told my date what happened, he pointed out something I hadn't even considered. By saying I was on my way to a date, I'd basically told the driver I was single, which may have emboldened him. A couple of my male friends said the same thing and recommended in the future to say I'm married in creepy situations like that, though I'm not sure it would always help. It was late on a weeknight, and my boyfriend and I had been out drinking with friends. We'd ended up at another couple's apartment about 15 minutes from our place. But it was getting close to the time when we both had to think about work the next morning. Neither of us wanted to deal with driving, so we called an Uber like we'd done dozens of times before. When it arrived, everything seemed perfectly normal. The driver smiled, made small talk, and nothing about him set off any alarms. I remember leaning back in the seat, feeling that heavy, tired buzz you get after a long night. At first, the ride felt routine. He was polite, the car was clean, and I figured I'd close my eyes for a bit until we were home. But then, like someone flipped a switch, my adrenaline kicked in. We reached an intersection that I actually recognized, rare for me since I'm awful with directions, but I knew enough to realize we were near our neighborhood. Right turn would take us toward home. Left turn would lead to a completely different town. The driver stopped at the light and clicked on his left blinker. I looked over at my boyfriend and could see the tension on his face. He asked the driver where exactly he was going, because this wasn't the right way. The guy gave a smooth answer, saying not to worry, that he was from the area and knew a shortcut. It wasn't totally impossible, especially since we were still on a main road with plenty of side streets, so we both tried to relax. But the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. We hit another stoplight a few minutes later, and once again he had a choice: right toward our general direction, or left toward the next town over. Again, he flicked on the left blinker. This time I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His phone screen was completely dark. No GPS, no Uber app, no tracking. He wasn't even pretending to follow directions. That's when my pulse started hammering in my ears. I quietly got my phone ready to call 911 and slid my car keys into my palm, my fingers wrapped around the sharp, shiv-like keychain I carry for self-defense. My boyfriend, though, had reached his limit. He suddenly lurched forward so that he was half standing between the seats, yelling at the driver to tell us where the hell he was taking us, because this wasn't our route. The reaction was immediate. The driver snapped on the right blinker instead, swerving at the last second into the lane going the correct direction. His voice spilled out apologies in a rush, over and over. "I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry, I've got you. I'll take you home now." Almost like he'd been caught and was panicking. My boyfriend, still leaning over the front seat, told him flatly, "You know what? Never mind. We're getting out right here. Just unlock the doors." And that's when the guy's demeanor cracked even more. He got defensive, his voice shaky, repeating, No, I'm sorry, please. I'll go the right way now, I promise." He wasn't even trying to make up a story to cover himself anymore. He practically admitted with his tone that he'd been taking us somewhere else. I can't even clearly remember whether we stayed in the car the rest of the way or got out and walked. It was late. We were tired and a little drunk, and the adrenaline made everything hazy. But what stuck with me was the image of that dark phone screen and how fast he backtracked as soon as we noticed. That, and the way my boyfriend's sudden movement made him switch from left to right in a heartbeat. We reported him the next morning on the app. Uber never told us exactly what they did, but we've never had him as a driver again. And I can only hope that whatever they did means no one else ever had to sit in that car wondering what might happen next. I still think about it sometimes and wonder what his plan had been. I honestly don't want to know. It's been about 4 months now, maybe a little longer, but this night still sits in the back of my mind like it happened yesterday. I was 19 at the time, heading home from university after a long day of classes. Normally, I'd have my own keys on me, but around that period I'd lost them, and my mom kept putting off taking me to make a new copy. I'd been nagging her about it for weeks, but she still hadn't done it. So my routine became knocking on the door until my younger brother came to let me in. Except that day, she'd taken his keys too, so he was locked in just like I was locked out. I asked my brother to pass my charger through the door so my phone wouldn't die, and called one of my aunts to see if I could hang out at her workplace until my mom got home. She agreed and told me she'd cover the Uber once I got there. I requested a ride, and the pickup spot ended up being across the street, rather than directly in front of my house. Nothing major. It just worked out that way. When the car pulled up, I got that subtle off feeling. Not necessarily danger, just that vague unease I get in every taxi or Uber. But I told myself I was being paranoid, rolled down the window for some air, and held on tight to both of my phones. Everything seemed normal enough at first. We made small talk. He followed the GPS. I stared out the window, counting the minutes. But when we got close to the neighborhood where my aunt lives, she runs a small convenience store out of her home in a gated residential area, something shifted. Instead of slowing near her street, he drove right past it. When I asked, he insisted he was following the GPS, but kept angling the screen so I couldn't see it. He drove with this quiet confidence like he knew exactly where he was going, and it wasn't to my aunt's house. I tried to reassure myself that maybe I was mistaken, but then I started recognizing landmarks that were nowhere near her place. Like a fountain I'd only ever seen when my mom drove out toward my uncle's house, which was much farther away. He was steering us through stretches of empty lots and half-constructed houses, the kind of area where you can feel how far you are from help. Then he stopped the car. We were on some hill at what looked like the edge of the development, and he turned off the engine. That's when it clicked how bad this could get. My phone had no credit left. As that realization hit me, my aunt called out of the blue asking where I was, and my stomach dropped because I couldn't answer. The guy just sat there staring at me. When I asked, "Where did you take me?" he gave this flat, chilling reply. "I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough. I grabbed my backpack, opened the door, and said loudly, "That's fine, I'll see myself out," then bolted. I ran as fast as I could, holding my bag in front of me instead of on my back so he couldn't grab it if he chased me. My aunt stayed on the phone while I looked for somewhere to hide. Knocking on random doors didn't feel safe, and the car was still following me. Then I spotted a barren lot with tall concrete walls and a heavy metal gate. There was just enough space under the gate to squeeze through. I tossed my bag under and crawled in after it. Inside there was an old electric control box, big enough for me to crouch inside, so I opened it and hid there, phone still pressed to my ear. For nearly 2 hours I stayed curled up in that metal box. My aunt and uncle were on another call together trying to top up my phone credit and track my live location through WhatsApp. I was fighting off my own arachnophobia and trypophobia because of the tiny spiders and old honeycombs inside, sneaking out only once to pee before darting back. Every time I peeked out, the car was still there. Finally, at some point, the guy must have left. My uncle drove around in his truck honking until I could tell the sound was close. I crawled out, sprinted to him, and he took me straight to my aunt's pharmacy. For a while I actually wondered if I'd overreacted and jumped out of a car like some lunatic. But later, when I checked the Uber app, it said I'd already paid and had been dropped off at my destination, which was obviously a lie. That sealed it for me. I asked my aunts not to tell my mom right away because she panics easily and wouldn't have been any help in the moment. I only told her later, on the drive to finally make a copy of my keys. These days she always keeps credit on my phone. My family jokes about how calm I stayed and how quick I was to react. But I still think about that night and how easily it could have gone differently. I even messaged his profile to every girl I know so they could cancel if they ever got him as their driver. Since then, I've stopped taking Ubers altogether. Wherever that man is now, I never want to cross paths with him again.